What's up, Vortex Nation? We got 10 minutes here with Mr. Ryan Muckenhirn to talk about the evolution of rifle scope tube sizes. And Ryan joins us here because Ryan has been in the industry, whether selling firearms at a gun shop or working with different firearms-related companies, and now working for Vortex, of interacting with many different scopes over history. And Ryan, it used to be the case, especially here in the U.S., that kind of 1-inch scope tubes reigned supreme. Now there's 30 mil scope tubes, and consumers are getting 34s and 35s, and shoot, even now a 40 millimeter tube came out. I mean, what's been the evolution of this? What's going on there?
Well, it's a good question. I think it's pretty subjective and open, to some interpretation. Going back many years ago when I was a retailer, a very young guy, it was kind of one of my first real jobs behind the counter in a shop. One of my optics reps came in with the new line for this particular company, and we opened it up, and there was a rifle scope that was this newfangled thing that was a 30 millimeter tube, and we're all looking at it and like, wow, that's really incredible. But the looming question was why. And I think at the time he was pretty straightforward with it, and he said, well, the 30 millimeter tube is kind of a new way that we can improve some small little attributes of optical performance and this, that, and the other thing. I think the perception is that it was like way too radical and far too European.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and so interestingly enough, that particular optic didn't do very well for us, and then I think it was ultimately discontinued. Several years later, now 1 inches are kind of the thing of the past, and 30s seem to be taking off. I think we see a lot of 30.
Even in hunting.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to a few things. There's some misconceptions that we should address, and I think there's some definite points of talking on a 30 millimeter tube. I think from what I gather and from what I hear at a lot of shows and on the telephones and things like this, is there's still a perception that a 30 millimeter tube is going to drastically improve the amount of light that you see in a low light situation with your rifle scope. And that really is not true every time. There's some caveats to that. In reality, when we're looking at a 30 millimeter main tube, what we're doing is we're increasing the internal size of that optic in which we can now stuff more adjustment or a larger field of view or a combination of both. Mm-hmm. And with that, there is some room to start looking at, well, is it a brighter image? And this depends entirely on optical system, and a whole bunch of conversations get into that. But really, it's for adjustment, field of view, or a combination of both. When we water it down, it's optical.
Simply making it a bigger tube does not make optics better. It's the stuff that comes along with having more room to play with.
Correct. And so within a given line, you can have a 1-inch scope that will outperform a 30 millimeter tube in low light, depending on optical system, of course. Mm-hmm. So now it's kind of become the acceptable norm, though, like 30 millimeters, the benchmark. And I think there's also a lot of like ring and mount support for this, and that's kind of what's growing this, whereas maybe 10 or 15 years ago, like when I had gotten started, most everything was 1 inch.
It's probably hard to find 30 mil rings.
It was, yeah. It was, and I sit and try to think about it, and I can't remember having a lot of 30 millimeter options on the rack, on the pegboard. It was almost all 1 inch, and 30 millimeter was kind of a special order thing. At the time, I'd never heard of a 34 or 35 millimeter scope until, years later, when we started seeing some of the more long range and kind of precision rifle-esque rifle scopes built.
Now, at that point, having already gone through the 1 inch to 30 mil thing, were you kind of like, I guess this is just the next thing? Or were you like, pump the brakes? Like, we just were at 1 inch and now we're at these massive, gigantic toilet paper roll size scope tubes.
So before working for an optics company, I was under the understanding that just meant better. And with really no reason as to why. Why was it better? What are we gaining or what are we losing or anything like that? It was like, it's 34, it's 35, it's bigger, it's better.
Heck yeah.
Now working for an optics company, I have a completely different feeling and understanding about this. But it has been interesting to see, and I think that it's going to continue on getting bigger until we change the shape of a rifle scope completely into something totally different.
Truth be told, I kind of thought, I saw a little bit of the tail end of that kind of major transition of 1 inch to 30 mils, though I don't think 1 inch will ever go away. No, because it's one of those things. It's grandfathered in. Yeah. It's I wish it was like the manual transmission, even though I think the manual transmission may eventually go away.
We'll just call it the 30-06 of the rifle scope tube diameter.
Exactly. It's the 30-06. Thank you. So it'll never really go away, but the 30 mils are kind of here, and they're the more popular thing. And
no doubt.
I remember thinking to myself, and I thought to myself now, still at this point, like, well, that's where we're going to stop, because the 30 mil just makes sense. And now there's a lot of 34s and 35s, and I was like, strictly for precision stuff, but that's kind of not really the case always anymore. And like I said, now, our friends at another brand have come out with a 40 millimeter tube in a hunting scope, and I'm kind of like, what's going on here? Like, will tubes just continue getting bigger? Will they eventually taper off? Look at us asking this question. We're working in an optics company.
Right.
I
think it's valid. As the evolution of technology changes and evolves, and we in an industry, or we as a company, or as a whole, discover new ways that we can incorporate technology and utilize technology, form factor changes. I think that's the inevitability. I mean, look at the Sony Discman. That everybody have. I found mine the other day, and I looked around for a CD to put into it and listen to it, and I didn't have it. And now, like, we have devices for carrying our music on that are the size of a matchbook. So
right. It kind of makes you wonder too, like, at what point will mounting your scope in rings even not be like a thing?
Right.
At what point will it just be where you buy one unit and everything is in it? There's no it. I'll be honest, I think it'd be pretty sweet if you could make it happen, because it would eliminate a lot of the error that admittedly probably happens in the mounting process.
Certainly.
An overwhelming majority of errors that people encounter are from the mounting process. But then all of a sudden, if you start talking about that, you start talking about likely changing rifles and the way that they look, and work and perform and function.
And we've seen that too. If we go way back before even 1 inch was a thing, back when 7/8 inch diameter was a thing, and a couple of like interesting oddball dimensional choices for rifle scope tubes when the adjustments were on the external of the rifle scope.
Oh yeah,
like the old Lymans and Winchesters and stuff like that, and Unerdals and optics that were as long as the rifle's action and barrel, and everything was out there. Like, that was the acceptable form factor. Fast forward 20 years, it then changed to internal adjustments and spring systems. Fast forward 20 years, and we went from a scope that's 20 inches long to a scope that's 12 inches long. And we're seeing that shorten up more and more and more every half decade or so. So technology changes, form factor changes. Yeah, what's on the event horizon in 10 years? Is going to be neat.
Yikes. Yeah,
unrecognizable, maybe? I don't know.
Wild. It's wild. Especially the way that things continue to just, like, seem to grow exponentially. Technology. You look at the last, 2,000 years, and the biggest and craziest technological inventions have happened within the last, 150.
Yep.
Whereas there's many hundreds of years back then. And I'm not discounting engineers of any time, because you look at any historical piece and you can always kind of look at things and be like, it's incredible that somebody from that time period could have thought of this. So don't get me wrong, there's been brilliant minds since the dawn of time, but it just seems like stuff has now that you have that basis of really good technologies that engineers have come up with over time, it's like people are just building upon that in rapid succession. What will happen to tube sizes?
Will they be tubes?
Will they be tubes? Which do you prefer? Will they be squares? What do you prefer, 30? 1?
Well, it's situational. I guess it depends. I have a minute. I have to quick audit everything I have. I've had kind of everything. I've got 1 inch. Well, heck, I've got 7/8 inch. I've got 1 inch. I've got 30. I've got 34. I've got 35. Everything serves a purpose. A lot of my 1 inch scopes are on classic hunting rifles, our lighter weight rigs, or our ultralight rigs. A lot of my 30s are kind of filling a niche across all spectrums here. I mean, from long-range precision to even lightweight hunting.
Yeah.
So I'd say overall, I'm trending towards 30 millimeter as my mainstay and go-to at this time.
At this time.
That could change.
Be curious to know what other people out there listening as we come up on 10 minutes of this thought-provoking conversation. If you're out there, what tube size do you find yourself getting the most of, and where do you see tube sizes going in the future?
Profound.
Whew, getting chills.
Yes.
3, 2, 1. Mr. Muckenhirn, thank you for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
It's been a great 10-minute talk. Appreciate it, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.